everybody. This is our last of three presentations. Our third community read that the Penn Yan Action Coalition has done. This one was entitled Dancing in the Mosque and Letters to Her Son. And Mira Kadari is our author. And our first week we did a book discussion. Squeezed it all into 1 hour of time. Very amazing book if anybody has not read it yet. The second week we did a discussion with our author, and that was even more incredible to see what she's gone through and what she still is going through. And if you're listening to the news, you know what's happening in Afghanistan, and that causes great concern. Our third week, which is what we try to do, a local connection when we do our book read. We try to figure out what's happening locally and how we can help. So do you remember Mr. Rogers had a saying that when things got bad, you look for the helpers. And that's what we did when we started thinking about Afghanistan. And what came up immediately is Saints Place in Rochester. So we called Saints Place, and I talked to Stacy way back when in the fall, and we decided to do a collection of bedding, used and new bedding, because they were needing that for the Afghan refugees at the time. So the community did a huge collection. We were overwhelmed, and when we went up the second and third and fourth trip, we met Stacy each time, welcoming us and greeting us and thanking us. And we wish to thank the community for all they've done. So there are lots of helpers in Rochester that are working with all kinds of refugees, and that is their goal and their place. Stacy McCarthy has been with the organization. I think I counted 5 or 6 years, Stacy. 2 years as a volunteer, and then she was employed. And when we look on the website, you see her, she's head of finance. She does grant writing. She's the social media person. And when we called up and asked, could you do some interviews? Could you talk to us about Saints Place? Well, guess who landed with that job? Poor Stacy. So we're thankful, Stacy. And we know that they're just beginning a very big fundraiser. I want to say like a huge yard sale. Is that correct? Several weeks setting it up. So that is something that she's involved with right now as well. So we're very honored and thankful to have her here to talk to us about what's happening locally, especially with our Afghan refugees. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you for inviting me. So I want to make sure we have enough time at the end for questions. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions. I probably have enough material for much longer than an hour. So if it starts to get repetitive, just be like, enough. So Rochester is really kind of a blessed city as far as services for refugees, because we have quite a few groups in this area that are advocates for the refugee community and help refugees as they arrive here in Rochester. And to really understand how refugees come here, you kind of have to understand how they come into the United States. So every year, whoever is in charge in the federal government, whoever's the president at the time, the government's called a refugee cap for the year. And that cap, it's just completely dependent on who's in office and how supportive they are of refugees. So you could have one president who sets the refugee cap, like Obama set the refugee cap at 125,000 a year for his couple last years in office. And then when Trump came into office, the refugee cap fell over those 4 years to the lowest number it's ever been, under 10,000. And then Biden came into office and he set the cap again back up at 125. So the refugee cap is completely dependent on who's in office. I wish it were something that both parties would agree should be a number that stays relatively the same every year. And here's why. What happens when you get a presidency that lowers the refugee cap dramatically, like what happened under our last president, all of the services and all the people employed who process refugees and do their vetting, do their placement, all of these agencies and all of these employees, both here in the United States and abroad, because we have all sorts of people abroad in all the different countries that have refugee camps and where people are processed to become a legal refugee. All of those people lose their federal funding if the refugee cap goes like this, and they all get let go, and all of those programs disappear. So then when you get to a new administration that says, you know what, we support refugees coming, we're going to set the cap here, you can't just turn on a faucet and let in all of those refugees who had been vetted and had been, had been past their vetting and had been given the designation of a legal refugee. You can't just all of a sudden start letting them in because you don't have any of the infrastructure in place anymore. So unfortunately, it's one of these areas where it's completely dependent on who's in office, and there's like this huge lag time to get things up and going again. So what happened with this last transition, we went from one presidency to another presidency, but what happened right after the end of this presidency was the crisis in Afghanistan. So you had, during the last presidency, just a ton of refugees who had been designated as legal refugees. Legal refugees do not get to choose the country that they're settled in. You don't get to say, I want to go to America. If you have a family member there, you're more likely to get placed there in the United States. But if you have no connection to any other country and you've been designated a legal refugee in Somalia, every country in the world who accepts refugees sets a cap of how many they will accept for that fiscal year. And that fiscal year starts in October for refugee numbers. And then you're just assigned. You're assigned a country and you're told this is where you're going to be going. And so we had refugee families, maybe they'd lived in a refugee camp for the last decade, and 5 of their kids were born in refugee camps, and they were designated a legal refugee, and they sold their meager belongings and they went to the airport to come to be resettled because they'd been assigned to the United States. And the administration said, nope, we're not taking any more right now. And they got sent back to a refugee camp. And for some families that happened over and over and over again. And when COVID hit, as you can imagine, that threw a huge wrench in refugee numbers because, everybody was afraid of having people come into different countries and spread COVID. Completely understandable. So people who were in line, who had been told you've received legal refugee status, you will be resettled somewhere, they got pushed back. And your legal refugee status only applies for a certain duration of time. And if that amount of time passes and you weren't resettled for whatever reason, global pandemic, new administration, whatever it was, you have to go back and go through the vetting process again. So it can be a really emotional, very difficult process for somebody living in a refugee camp who they might wait just decades to be able to be designated a legal refugee and then have the country they've been assigned to be able to bring them. Because so many things affect whether or not they're able to be brought. So in the United States, we had COVID affect our numbers, really dropped our numbers down. Then once COVID's restrictions started easing up, once the vaccines came out and things were looking up, then we had the crisis in Afghanistan, and the Afghani refugees were prioritized. So all the refugees from Burma and Somalia and the Congo and all of these other places that have been waiting and had been told they were coming got pushed to the back of the line, and the Afghans were brought in. So like for the last 6 months, we've seen probably 99% Afghan families arrive in Rochester. And then right on the heels of that crisis, what happened? The war in Ukraine. And so we are just barely now starting to see some families. We've gotten a couple Burmese families, we've gotten a couple of Congolese families, but really we haven't seen those kind of families in years, in just years, because so many different things affect, you know, the number of refugees that are brought in and from what country they come from. So when a cap is set, so like if the cap is 125,000, Rochester takes 1% of those refugees. That is the agreement that Rochester, as a city in the United States, our local government has said that they will accept 1% of refugees. And in Rochester, there used to be only one agency. Now there's two. Catholic Family, well, it used to be called Catholic Family Center. Now it's called, they merged with Catholic Charities. But they have the federal contract in Rochester to process legal refugees who are coming here. And now there's another group called World Relief that is also has a federal contract. And those two groups process refugees who are coming to the Rochester area. And what that means is they receive federal dollars to have the staff on hand. So they'll get notified, you know, these families are coming your way. Here's their bios. Actually, I could probably show you. I'll just cover up the names. So this one just came from World Relief today. So this is an Afghan family, 6 people, and this is what I received. So I received this bio that World Relief has received, that this family is going to be coming in on this date. And so that federal agency, either Catholic Family Center or World Relief, they have the staff on hand to go out and find them an apartment or home. And they help them get acclimated and receive the aid that they need for the first 3 months that they're here. Sometimes they have aftercare that stretches to 6 months or a year, depending on how many people that they have. So that means caseworkers are hired. They have a housing coordinator. They have, you know, all these different people that work there to help these refugee families. And refugees receive a little bit of money to help them resettle, but it's shockingly low. So it's less than $1,000. So each refugee, so say you come here as a single man, you're going to receive from our federal government, it's like $985. And that's all the money that's supposed to get you through your first 3 months. That's your rent, that's your food, that's your transportation, that's any medical issues that arise. That's all the money you receive. And after about 3 months, you should be able to get on DSS for a little while until you find a job and get some food stamps and things like that. But for those first 3 months, it's a shockingly low number. It's a lot easier if you're coming in with a family, like a family of say 10, because each refugee would receive that amount. And so it's actually easier to find housing for a larger family because they have a larger amount of money to be able to afford anything. Because we all know what rents cost in Rochester right now. So when we started receiving all these Afghans, what CFC had to do for like the single man at Christmas time, I remember when we were doing Christmas baskets, we had one house that they had rented and 7 single men were all living in the same house together. They'd never met each other beforehand, but it was the only way that they could afford the rent. You know, it was the only way that they could afford the rent. So here's where Saints Place steps in. So when a refugee is assigned to Rochester and say they're from Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is a special circumstance here in Rochester where it's not in other cities. If a refugee comes here from Afghanistan, there's actually 2 groups, Saints Place and another group called Keeping Our Promise, that help Afghan refugees. So Saints Place helps all refugees, every nationality, every single one. Keeping Our Promise helps Afghans and those from Iraq who were our military allies. So maybe they were a translator for our military in Afghanistan. And those refugees have a special status. It's called a special immigrant visa. It's an SIV. And Keeping Our Promise helps Afghans who have that designation as a military ally. So the reason Saints Place came into be, it was back in 1998. So the founder of Saints Place met a family here in Rochester from Somalia, and they had nothing. So that amount of money that they received, that's also for furniture and clothing. I mean, somebody coming from Somalia is not going to have a winter coat or winter boots or any of that. And she met this family, the single mother and kids, and they were just living in abject poverty. And so she reached out to her friends and said, you know what, we've got to help this mother. And she started collecting donations in her garage and started working with this mother, who introduced her to another refugee family and another refugee family. And she very quickly outgrew her garage. And so that's when St. Louis Church, Colleen was a parishioner there, said, you know, we would like you to come on campus as a ministry of the church, and we will help support this ministry. And that's kind of how Saints Place started. And then St. John of Rochester said a couple of years later, we would like to help you as well. So what Saints Place does is we try to alleviate some of those expenses that these new refugees incur, so that that little amount of money that they receive can go to things like their rent, like medical expenses, and other things that they might need. So what we do is, when a new family's coming in town, CFC or World Relief will call us and they'll say, hey, next week I've got this Congolese family of 8 coming in, and I've got this Afghani family of 6 coming in, and this other Afghani family of 5 coming in. I'm sending you their bios. These are the addresses of the apartments or houses that we have put them in. This is the ages of everybody in the family. And then we get to work. So we have a warehouse where we store furniture, and we go into the house and the apartment, and we bring sofas and lamps and artwork for the walls and shower curtains and towels and dishes and toasters and blenders and all the things. We just go into that house and we completely furnish it. So we give new beds and new pillows and bedding. We received a lot of bedding from you guys. We give bedding so everybody in that family gets 2 pairs of sheets and a new pillow and a blanket and a comforter, and as well shower curtains and bath mats and things like that. And then we furnish that home and get it completely ready. So when the family arrives at the airport, they're met by their social worker from CFC or World Relief, and they're taken right to this apartment or house that's already completely furnished. Then within the first week or 2 of their arrival, we get them an appointment over at our clothing closet. And our clothing closet is located at St. John of Rochester Church. And when their school closed, they gave us half of their school. And I have some videos I can show you if we have enough time later of what our clothing closet looks like. And so the families, and right now, that's another job I have right now. Our clothing closet manager retired a couple of months ago to get married. And so I'm also the clothing closet manager, which has been actually a really fun experience to be able to be over there and to be able to really meet and work with the refugees as they come over. And when they come to the clothing closet, it's set up just like a Target. I mean, it's beautiful. A lot of clothing closets are really kind of depressing places to go. And they just kind of make you feel bad about yourself to even be there, because a lot of times they're just bins on the floor or something like that. Our clothing closet is just, it's beautiful. It's a lovely, wonderful place to shop. And so they come in and they get a bag, a garbage bag, and they get 1, 2, or 3 of them, depending on how much stuff they end up taking. And we go through and we get them winter coats and winter boots and socks and underwear and tons of pants and shirts. And the women get jewelry and scarves and purses and makeup. And I mean, we just have everything that they need over there. And our hope in being able to do that is that they have what they need to get through our winters, because so many of them come from places where they don't experience our kind of winters. And again, to alleviate the financial pressure that they feel when they get here, because some of them come with absolutely nothing, or maybe a carry-on, and they need enough clothing to get them through so that they don't have to spend what funds they have those first few months on clothes. The other programs that Saints Place has is we have a refugee educational initiative. And so that is meant to help refugees who've aged out of public school and are looking to go to like a vocational course or to community college. Actually, I just sent off a scholarship for someone a girl who's headed to the University of Buffalo, or maybe they need a computer to go to school, or maybe they just finished the electrician's program at Oasis and they've got a job, but that new job requires about $500 worth of personal tools. We have a scholarship fund where we can award scholarships to help those kids, again, to alleviate that financial pressure, because we want them to be able to support themselves and their family. And then the fourth program we do is a tutoring program. And we have 2 locations in the city where twice a week we have people who volunteer to be tutors and help kids with their homework and help adults studying for their citizenships exams or their driver's license exam or whatever it is that they might need. So those are kind of the programs and kind of what Saints Place does and why we kind of started doing what we do. So any questions before I move on about that part? Yes, Kay.
You mentioned this $980 that is given per person to last them for 3 months for rent and food and everything. Who in their infinite wisdom came up with this $980 to last for this period of time?
Well, kind of like our federal minimum wage, it was set a long time ago and it's just never been raised. It just has not been raised. So maybe, 10 years ago, you could get an apartment, for a much cheaper price, but it has to be approved by Congress and by the Senate in order to be raised.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that part? Okay. So I thought I would show you, well, there are a couple of things I was going to do. So let me first, since this is a book club about Afghans, I talked to 3 Afghani women and gave them some questions about their experiences in coming here. One of them asked that she not be recorded. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the things she told me. And then the other 2 sent me their recordings. They didn't want to be on camera because they both have family members back in Afghanistan who were not necessarily safe. And so a lot of like when we take pictures or anything like that at the clothing closet, you'll see oftentimes I just post a picture of like a baby instead of posting pictures of adults, unless I ask first their permission and make sure that they feel like it would be safe to have their photo taken. But this first family I spoke to, it's a parent, they came to the clothing closet to shop, and it's a mom and dad, and they have 4 little kids, including a 1-year-old. And they came here directly from Afghanistan last year, and they arrived in December. So they went from Afghanistan to Kabul, then to Dubai, then New York City, and then Rochester. So that's how they arrived here. And they weren't able to bring any of their family, extended family. So no brothers, sisters, parents, they were all left behind. They were just able to, the husband and wife and children were able to come out. But they did say they were able to talk to their family in Afghanistan on the phone and ask them how they're doing. And I asked them what their first impression was. I asked her what her first impression was of Rochester. And she said, oh, it was a very bad memory. She said they opened the door and everywhere there was snow, everywhere. It was just everywhere. But she said they eventually got used to it. I asked them about the assistance they received when they got here, and they said, we got enough to survive, not 100% of the assistance. And the father actually knew somebody who was already here, a man who had worked in his same office was already here. So he must have worked for like the embassy or something, and another guy had been able to get here. The father speaks very good English because he was a because he worked with Americans. The mother does not speak English, so the dad translated. And she said that it's been very hard on the children to learn the language because they're so young, and it's just been a huge challenge to learn the language here. The dad, when he went to go apply for a job, and this happens to a lot of refugees, his wife and the kids, their social security cards came through pretty quickly. They got theirs within like the second month they were here. But the father's social security card took 4 to 5 months to get, which means that he couldn't work. Can't work. You can't get a job if you don't have a social security card. And that actually happens quite a bit. Like sometimes the refugees' paperwork gets sent to the wrong city, or maybe they have the same name, because we get a lot of refugees who are like Amiris. Their last name is Amiri. We probably have 10 Amiri families. And so maybe they get their name mixed up with another family. And so oftentimes it'll take a long time for them to get that card, which allows them to work. But now the dad has got his social security card. He was able to get a job, and he's actually got a job that is a 3-minute walk from their apartment, which is a miracle, because none of these refugees come with vehicles. None of them have cars, so they rely on public transportation. We actually have one of the gentlemen who sits on our board works for Caldwell Manufacturing, and Caldwell Manufacturing decided when all these Afghans started coming that they really wanted to employ Afghans, and they ran into this trouble that they just couldn't get to work. And so the company invested in the cost of a shuttle service. They hired a taxi who's actually a refugee who had been here for several years and had been able to buy his own van and started taxi service. And they hired this guy, and he goes every morning and he picks up, I think they've got 17 Afghan men now who work at Caldwell Manufacturing, and he picks them up and takes them to work and then drops them off back at home after work, and Caldwell pays for that cost. So when I say there's all these wonderful groups that really support refugees in Rochester, we really are very, very, very lucky. Refugees here are lucky to have that level of support. And what else from this family? They are now living, when they first came here, they said there was only one other family living near them that was another Afghan family, and the other two, but now they've moved and they live by 5 other Afghan families. So they say that they sit outside together and watch their children play and can talk to each other in their native language, which is wonderful. The other 2 ladies sent me their audio files. So I'm going to share my screen with you now so we can listen to them answer some questions.
Hello, this is Suhaila Rizai from Afghanistan.
Can you hear that? Yes? Okay.
When did you come to the United States?
I came to United States on August 2021.
Did you come directly from Afghanistan or from a refugee camp?
Yeah, I directly come from Afghanistan to US.
Did you come straight to Rochester?
Actually, no. I was for 2 months in a Air Force camp in New Mexico, and then came to Rochester.
Was your family able to come with you? If not, have they joined you now?
No, they were not able to come with me. Just my sister could join me, and still the rest of my family are living in Afghanistan.
Do you keep in touch with extended family and friends who remained in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I'm in touch with them, but not as I was before. It is somehow limited for me.
What were your first impression of arriving in Rochester?
The first impression of arriving to Rochester was about everything, like surprising for me that I didn't know anything about Rochester, and coming suddenly, it was like an impression for me.
What kind of help and support did you find waiting for you here?
Coming to here, I find many supports from the beginning at the airport, welcoming, housing, English language center, all other financial supports, and other services that I had to receive them because of being a new arrival here. I need to have them, and I received all.
What kind of help do you wish you had received?
All helps that I wish to receive, I received all of them from the beginning, from the arriving up to now. I think I received all the services that it was supposed that I had to receive.
How was your first home in the United States different from the home you left behind?
Yeah, sure, it is completely different from the house that I left behind, as it is like a smaller one, and somehow the facilities are more than what I had in my country.
What was the biggest adjustment moving to the United States?
The biggest adjustment was the language, that somehow I could speak English, and it was the biggest language, the biggest adjustment that I could make connections and networks with people.
Were you or your spouse or both able to secure employment within your first few months?
Yeah, I could find a job according to my work experience in the first few months.
What was the biggest obstacle in finding employment?
The biggest obstacle was, although I had the experience, but it was not like an accepting experience for the United States, as it was not a US experience. And this is why it was hard for them to accept this and refer, accept and make find it as a reference for the new job for me.
If you have children, were they experiencing in adjusting different than yours? How?
No, I don't have children.
If you have been in the United States for many years, have you been able to travel back to Afghanistan to visit friends and family?
No, it is about 1 year that I'm here, and I cannot go back to my country and visit my friends.
What things have you found to be surprisingly expensive in the United States? What things are least expensive here?
As my experience, according to my country in the United States, everything is, I think it is because of currency, it is higher than what I had in my country, but the groceries are somehow less expensive or the same as my country.
Were you able to find other refugee families from Afghanistan in Rochester to build a community of friends with similar backgrounds?
Yeah, I could find some families and friends in Rochester. Yeah, I could find.
Did you speak English before you arrived? If not, how long did it take for you to feel comfortable to speak the language?
Yeah, when I arrived to the United States, I had the knowledge of English language, and it was somehow easy for me to communicate.
Okay, two things I just wanted to say that she mentioned that I wanted to expound on. One of them, she said, my work experience was not an American experience. So what's interesting in talking to Afghan refugees who've come in the last 6 months, you know, we've had a lot that were nurses and doctors and judges and attorneys and teachers, but that experience and those certifications do not translate here. You can't be a nurse in Afghanistan and start working here as a nurse. You have to become completely recertified. And so you have a lot of refugees who, you know, were at this level at a high economic status in Afghanistan because of the work they were able to get there, who when they get here, cannot secure a similar job for many years. So it's a huge adjustment in so many ways, but that's one that sometimes we don't think about, that some of our refugees, especially from a place like Afghanistan, have come from, they were quite wealthy in their country that they left. And now they're kind of starting from the bottom again. The other thing that she talked about was what things were more expensive. And the previous lady I was talking about, the family, what she said was that the biggest surprise was clothing, that she, there's a lot of clothes that we wear here that she won't wear because she's much more traditional, and she wears a modest, to the wrist, to the ankle, and covers her head. She said that in Afghanistan, if you spend $100, you could probably get like 10, 15 items of women's clothing for that amount of money. And here you might get 2. And so she said that was the biggest surprise. So I'm just going to play this other one as well. Single.
Hello, my name is Marza Rizai and I'm from Afghanistan.
When did you come to the United States?
I came to United States on August 2021.
Did you come directly from Afghanistan or from a refugee camp?
I directly came to US from Afghanistan, and we were evacuated by US military first to Qatar, then to Italy, and we arrived on September 2021 in US.
Did you come straight to Rochester?
No, because I remained in a military air base for 2 months, almost 2 months, and then I moved to Rochester.
Was your family able to come with you? If not, have they joined you now?
No, just one of my older sister came with me, and 6 people of my family are still in Afghanistan and they could not come here.
Did you keep in touch with extended family and friends who remained in Afghanistan?
Yes, I can call and talk with my family and friends who are in Afghanistan.
What were your first impressions of arriving in Rochester?
The first impression that I had, that I was in a new environment and it was so different from Afghanistan, and I feel that can I be comfortable in this place, or can I be confident with the things that I will do in here?
What kind of help and support did you find waiting for you here?
I found that the help and the assistance that they made with us was so different and very beneficial, with housing, with clothing, with all doing legal assistance with us, and it was so different for me.
What kind of help do you wish to have received?
The help that I wanted and I wished to receive, I received all of them.
How was your first home in the United States different from the home you left behind?
It was different that in Afghanistan I was living with my family in a big house, and when I came here my house was an apartment and I had just a single bedroom, and it was smaller than the house that I used in Afghanistan.
What was the biggest adjustment moving to the United States?
The biggest adjustment was that I found in here was that I found many Afghan people in here, that they really was the same that we had in Afghanistan, and it was so surprising for me that I found such a market or a shop that I can purchase the things that I used in Afghanistan.
Were you or your spouse or both able to secure employment within your first few months?
Yes, I could find a job in the first months that I arrived here, and I could do it, and I had a job.
What was the biggest obstacle in finding employment?
It is clear that when you want to find a job, and especially that you want that your job be the same as you used in your background, and it was difficult for me to find a job that was similar to my experience, and I couldn't find it, but I'm still trying to find.
If you have children, were their experiences in adjusting different than yours? How?
No, I don't have children.
If you have been in the United States for many years, have you been able to travel back to Afghanistan to visit friends and family?
It is not almost 1 year that I'm in here, and I could not go to back Afghanistan and visit my friends and family.
What things have you found to be surprisingly expensive in the United States? What things are least expensive here?
The clothing is expensive, but the grocery and food is so it is not expensive.
Were you able to find other refugee families from Afghanistan in Rochester to build a community of friends with similar backgrounds?
Yes, I could find many of our friends and family are living in here, and we could find them, and we had a community, and we are sharing our sometimes the parties or other events we can share, and we are together.
Did you speak English before you arrived? If not, how long did it take for you to feel comfortable to speak the language?
Yes, I could speak English, and it was easy for me to speak.
Okay, so both of those girls, they're both single. Their English is really good. They both had jobs in Afghanistan where they used their English, and they actually are both employed. I met them at the clothing closet when they came in to get clothes when they got their jobs. So they are actually employed now by Catholic Family Center as caseworkers to work with arriving refugees. So that's what they're both doing now, which is amazing because they can use their language skills to do that. And they are really aware of the needs of the incoming refugee families. So they're both very sweet girls. One thing that she said, she was surprised that she was able to find stores here where she could buy things that she had in Afghanistan. So at the clothing closet, we give them this list of halal stores. So there are some very specific stores and places where you can buy the typical Afghani flatbreads and some of the typical meats and things like that that they purchase or that they would normally have in Afghanistan, which is really nice that we have that in our community. Any questions about those two girls or the other lady at all, or about their experiences? Yeah.
I don't know whether you can answer this or not, but you talked about the children who many of them do not speak any English at all. And, you know, statistics here in the United States show us that if a child is not reading by the 3rd grade level, at the end of 3rd grade, they never catch up. Do you have any idea how these children are going to do long-term in terms of catching up?
So I don't know that I have any statistics, but I'll tell you one other thing that Rochester has that other places don't have. We have a school called Rochester International Academy, RIA. I don't know if you've heard of that, but a lot of our refugee kids go to RIA. Now, RIA with the Rochester school district budget had a lot of cuts in the last couple of years, and now they don't have K through 12 like they used to. But at least for a chunk of time, a lot of the refugee kids end up going there to Rochester International Academy, where they're going to school with lots of kids with very similar backgrounds and very similar challenges. And they have the resources to help with that. We had here at St. Louis, it can be really hard, like in a regular school district, for example, like say you're in the Pittsford School District or whatever school district you're in, and you've got a kid who speaks Farsi or Sunni or whatever language it is, and it's not very likely that you're going to have a tutor or somebody or an aide who's going to be able to come and work with that child. So it can be a huge challenge. I will say what the kids have going for them is that it's a lot easier to learn a language as a child than it is an adult. We find with many of our refugees who arrive here as older refugees, like 50s, 60s, 70s, they probably will never really be comfortable with the language, that it'll be the next generation that'll really learn the language and be comfortable with the language, because it's just so hard to come and learn a language when you're, 60, 70 years old. So that's why we do like the tutoring program that we offer. There's another tutoring program over at the Pines of Parrington that they have a lot of refugees who live there. That's low income housing in Fairport. They have a tutoring program as well for a lot of refugee kids. So there are groups that are trying to, lift the refugee population and help them with those challenges. But you're right, it's a huge, huge challenge. Yes, Martha.
Make sure to unmute yourself, Martha.
Okay, I live outside Boston,
Uh-huh.
and in our area, congregations and community groups are sponsoring families.
Mhm.
And our Reformed Temple in Lexington, Mass. got an Afghan family with 5 little kids. And somebody in the congregation provided housing for a period of time. And somebody was in charge of making sure that they got all their health care taken, coordinated.
Mhm.
And somebody helped do English for the parents. And somebody helped the dad do a resume till he got a job. So the congregation had a team and they divided themselves up by their skills. And that family got help. They recently decided to move to California, where there was more of a Afghan community. But for the months that they were here, from last fall until now, they got all the, the financial aid and stuff from Catholic Charities and the government and all that kind of stuff. But the help was coming from a specific congregation that put together a team.
Yep. So we have that here as well, which is great. Like where we are here in Pittsford, a couple blocks over, the Presbyterian church there had a house on their property that they rented to like elder care prior. And when the Afghan crisis happened, they decided to rent it to this large Afghan family. There's, I think, about 10 people who live there now. So we went over and set up the house. And then this congregation is helping that family. The difficulty here that we had, and a lot of places had, is that when the Afghans came, they came very quickly and in really high numbers. And it's hard to get, when you've got, I think we got over 600, 650.
Wow.
That's a lot of caring circles and a lot of congregations that to help with those families.
Wow.
You don't know how quickly they're going to come and how quickly they're not. You heard the girls say, one of them, when she came to the United States, because the Afghan situation was different than a regular refugee. A regular refugee, like say from Somalia, would go from the refugee camp to the airport and come directly to, if they'd been assigned to Rochester, they'd come directly to Rochester. Okay. The Afghans, because they didn't have time to do full vetting in Afghanistan, because they did these, airplane evacuations, what they did is they pulled them out and they put them on military bases, not only here in the United States, but also in Qatar and other places. A lot of the ones we're receiving now have been in Qatar for the last 6 months. So they put them on military bases for several months while they finished the vetting process and made sure everybody was vaccinated and did all of that stuff that they normally is all done prior to a refugee being approved to come to the United States, period. But because we had this massive evacuation from Afghanistan, they didn't have time to do that. And so that was done on military bases in the US and also abroad before they came here to Rochester. It was hard to understand, but because of the audio, but I think what you were asking is that, Rochester is a larger city,
Right.
a lot of resources with Saints Place, with Keeping Our Promise. There's other groups called Refugees Helping Refugees. There's a Rochester Refugee Resettlement Services. So there's Mary's Place. There's other programs here in Rochester because it's a large community. And I think what you're asking is what can a more rural community do to get involved, one, and then to help refugees who might be in your area. So I would say two really important things. I would say one is what your group is already doing. I just think it's amazing that you have a group there who cares about this, the issue of refugees and refugee resettlement, and is educating their community on what it means to be a refugee and how refugees come to the United States, and are helping dispel some of the myths that we hear. There are a lot of misunderstandings that, there are people who don't even believe that refugees are legal. And so it's wonderful that you have a group there that is educating your community on the needs of refugees, on just the facts of refugees, and helping to kind of put a more
Humane.
a more humane picture of what it means, the refugee experience. That is so, so important, because all of those people in your community are voters. So when your representatives, if it ever comes up that they're going to raise the amount of money that they give a newly arriving refugee, if you've taught all of these people how ridiculous it is that $900 is not going to last you 3 months for rent, you can call your representative and say, hey, that's ridiculous. Let's get that raised. So getting involved in that way and educating your community is amazing. And then secondly, if you have refugees that move into your community, it's just so important to help them feel wanted and welcome. There was this horrible story in the news this last week about a refugee family who had moved to a small Midwestern town and was the only refugee family in the town. And though some people tried to reach out, their son just felt so alienated and bullied at school that he took his life last week. And how devastating, this was an Afghan family, on how devastating this has been for their family. And so reaching out and truly embracing your community, the people, refugees who move into your community, and not just helping them, with a gift card to get groceries, but, maybe hosting dinner and having them over for a barbecue. Or if you have a child a similar age to a child in that family, connecting them in some way, get them together to go to the beach together, or the lake together, or play video games or whatever, but helping make connections, because what refugees really need in their community are connections to other people in their community, so that they can build friendships and feel secure in their community. So those two things are so important. And we truly appreciate, your vetting drive that you did for us was marvelous. There's all sorts of things like those that you can do as well, but just educating your community and being welcoming to refugees who arrive there, I would say, are the most important things. Any other questions?
Deb, do you have a question?
I do. How did, you can say this, but the two young women that spoke, their English was so excellent and they're single, you said, or she said. How, can you talk about their jobs in Afghanistan and how they happened to be accepted?
So they worked with an American company in Afghanistan, and because they worked for an American company, their lives were considered in danger when Afghanistan fell. But because they were both single, they were only allowed to come themselves. They weren't allowed to bring their parents. They weren't allowed to bring the rest of their siblings, only themselves. If they had been married, they would have been eligible to bring their spouse and children. But because they were single, they could only come themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
So I will share with you, I took some videos this weekend. I went over to the clothing closet. I know our time is up, but I went over to our clothing closet, and I do tours all the time at our clothing closet when people wanted to, see the work we do. So I did some tours of the different rooms that we have over at the clothing closet, and I've uploaded them onto my YouTube channel. So I will share them with Dale, that he can share them with you. So at a later time, if you want to hop on there and watch those, you certainly can. And I will share with you a link. We were just on the news this week, setting up a home for a family from Ukraine. But it lets you, they followed the van over to the house where they were unloading the beds and the household goods. And it kind of lets you have an idea of what it looks like. We have this volunteer, we have a full-time driver, and we have a truck, and we have a part-time driver, we have a van, and then we have this crew of volunteers who go out every day and they pick up donated furniture, and then they go and they do the deliveries for the day. And we don't just help refugees. Remember how I said refugee numbers kind of go like this. So years where refugee numbers are going like this, we can help more people in our community who aren't necessarily refugees. So over at the clothing closet, I fulfill a lot of orders for Freedom House and Hillside and all sorts of different clothing closets and addiction programs and domestic abuse programs and veterans groups. And we help about 25 other nonprofits here in Rochester when we have the, when we have furniture and the household goods and the clothing available. Because we want the donations that come in to get used. I mean, we're not a storage center. We want them to keep going out the door. So, so we do a lot of deliveries to our community. When we had a big fire at the Pines of Parrington here, which is a low income unit. So Saint's Place actually set up most of the apartments when those people moved back into apartments. Saint's Place went over and set up those homes. With furniture and bedding and all their household goods and things like that. So it's lovely to be able to do that as well when we have the time and the resources to do so. So I will share those with Dale or Alex or whoever I'm sharing them with. Alex, sorry.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add to that. I will definitely get those out to the whole group along with the recording of this session. And I believe it was Martha who had sent a list of further reading that she had come up with or had previously after our first session. So I want to make sure to get that out to everybody too. And then I also just want to lift up that Alejandra, who I believe had to leave at 4 o'clock, but just so that we all see her comment in the chat. She wrote, "Thank you for this much needed conversation and for all the work that's being done for refugees. So proud to be in upstate New York in the company of caring global citizens." And I definitely think we all second that notion. Elizabeth says, "Thanks, Stacy and Alex and all." Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody. So just wanted to make sure those chat comments, everybody was aware of them. So
Thank you, Alex. And thank you so much, Stacy. You are the helper. You have just, when there's need, we need to look for the helpers, and they are out there. The Penn Yan Action Coalition, thank you very much for your work, and we're glad to be connected to you. So
Thank you.
pleasure.
We are grateful to you as well.
And our thank you to all the Penn Yan Action Coalition members. This will be the last this series. And thank you for all those of you that have attended all of them, and tell your friends they can go back and look on the webpage and be able to see the other ones if they missed them, or if they'd like to view the series again. And I'm sure Stacy would be welcome to have questions up at Saints Place if you have any future questions or donations that you'd like to help with. That would be great.
Feel free to email me. My email is on our website. Any other questions or anything else you wanted to say, just send an email.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy.
You're welcome. Alex, I'm going to stay on for a second as people leave so I can show you where those videos are.
Perfect. Perfect. Anything else, anyone? Thank you very much for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.